Good, appropriate time of the day, everyone. My name is probably FX, and I have been doing some reading over the past few days about the internet. More specifically, one very maybe controversial, but at least widely discussed phenomenon, and that is the Stop Killing Games initiative. And honestly, I just wanted to take some time and talk about it, get some thoughts down about it. I first heard about it from a colleague posting about it, and well, he's usually a smart guy, so I looked into it, tried to figure out what it was. I mostly watched a couple of YouTube videos, so I think now I'm just going to dive into some examination. Let's start with my browser. Hey, look, it's last week's research. That's okay. We can clear this. Okay, so we have a few things to figure out. The first is and this is actually very simple. We can describe it as, I guess it's an initiative. An initiative. Why is my chat over my robot? Let's do something about that. Yes, there we go. All these layers. So Stop Killing Games is basically a initiative to prevent game makers from shutting down online games. Well, that's maybe not accurate. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the community who would crucify me for such a definition. So let's say ensure that games remain playable after purchase. The idea being, I guess, a combat of when Ubisoft was saying you should get used to not owning games. And honestly, why anyone buys Ubisoft games at all after that is interesting to me. The idea that a company can't kill a game that you own. I think it happened most notably with a racing game called The Crew. I don't really play that many racing games, but we'll probably look into that as an example. I should also maybe talk about why I'm talking about this. And there are a few things I want to open up here. And one is because I guess the best way to put it is that I don't have all that much. I don't really have a horse in this race, in that I play video games. I don't play a lot of online games, and the ones I do, if they have to shut down, that will be okay to me. And I'm saying this not because I disagree with the stance or that I disagree with Stop Killing Games, but it allows me to be a bit more objective than some people might be. And like I'm fully in support of this Stop Killing Games. If people really want to be able to play the crew indefinitely, I hope they get the opportunity. But for me, it's not that big a deal. But that's good. It allows me to objectively look at both sides of this argument, because I know there was one of the videos that YouTube directed to me to was the pirate gaming controversy and everything that happened with him, and I'll probably be going into some of that because there's a lot of anger and a lot of honestly justified anger and annoyance, but there are subtleties, and I think we need to observe those as well. Another reason why I think I'm a good person to be talking about this is I mean, I can say I'm European, but that's not quite enough. So I will say European working in tech and go on to say during the inception of GDPR and NIS2 and CRA and other standards which, well, let's say right to repair and other standards and legislations and laws which have been brought into force for a specific purpose while I've been working alongside them as a cybersecurity professional, and I've watched companies do everything they can to loophole their way out of these. So I have some experience with what happens when companies start following the letter of the law instead of the spirit. And I think that's the big thing here that I will add a note of. The spirit of this initiative is good. The implementation becomes complicated, and I'm sure that's what everyone expected. So, these are the three. No, I'm also going to put there's the whole pirate gaming controversy, which we're going to discuss a bit because there are just some things to unpack. Okay, so we're actually going to dive right into it and go right to the website. StopKillingGames. It's relatively simple. Consumer movement. Why they didn't have a dark mode switch on this kind of bugs me. Like, it's a very good way to make sure a nerd completely ignores your website is by not having a dark mode switch. There's actually a dark reader add-on you can get for Firefox which can prevent such things, but it's daytime, so I'll just accept the burn to my retinas. So yeah, StopKillingGames to challenge the legality of publishers destroying video games that they have sold to customers. An increasing number of video games are sold effectively as goods with no stated expiration date, but designed to be completely unplayable as soon as support from the publisher ends. This is an interesting phrasing, the form of planned obsolescence, and the right to repair is actually something that we will discuss later, but planned obsolescence was the right to repair was kind of the combat to that. So this is a strong comparison, I think. Over the past year, they've successfully escalated complaints on the problem to consumer agencies in France, Germany, and Australia. New petitions, list of the actions taken. Let's take a brief glance at those. European Citizens Initiative, signing concluded, waiting on a response from the Commission. Ongoing, not bad. UK submitted a petition. I'm guessing they are ended prematurely due to Parliament dissolving. Received enough signatures, no answer from Parliament yet. When it comes to the UK, the answer from the Parliament's always going to be no, because they wouldn't want to listen to their people. Okay, so on the surface, this seems like a good thing, and I'm not saying that to say once you drill down it's a bad thing. I'm saying this seems like an easy thing to support. We are going to, if I just jump back over here, I do want to add one more box. Actually, no, because here we're talking about the tech side. So I do have the boxes. I thought I had not given myself the talking points I want. Okay, So we've looked at the past actions. There are still some coming up. The Digital Fairness Act doesn't address the problem, but covers adjacent issues. Okay. That's something that can still be done. The Citizens Initiative is finished. The UK initiative is the UFC. I'm going to assume this is some French authority and not some kind of ultimate fighting championship that you can. Okay. So yeah, some kind of consumer association. France's largest or first consumer association, I guess. So cool. They still have some ongoing work, not seeking donations. It's good that they have this here because honestly, if people can scam, they will. That's just the unfortunate nature of the internet as we currently stand. And their official Discord is closed. Interesting. Okay, I want to go into the FAQ because, while it might clear some stuff up, this is when this happens, a game is destroyed because no one can ever operate it again. That's okay. Why should people care? Video games are a unique creative work. Concept of destroying every existing copy of a book, song, film would be considered a cultural loss, but games aren't. It's a fair point. How is this going to save video games? This is actually something we want to discuss. I'm just pulling up my text editor in the background. Here it is. Ooh, a new version of Sublime Text is available. Do I want to download it? I do not. Are you asking companies to support games forever? Isn't that unrealistic? No, they're not asking that. That's kind of stupid. Like, was this really a frequently asked question? Because, no, that's not what they're asking for at all. Aren't games licensed? Licensing is a weird grey area. So, this is what Ubisoft would like you to believe, but I'm not deep enough into the legal side of things to really comment. Isn't it impractical? Not really. Well, maybe impractical currently, but if it was planned for, less so. Large scale MMOs, they require hardware, but let's see what they've said. Yep. Server emulators, thousands of players. Yeah, scalable. The thing about MMOs is they're just data exchanges, so they're not going to be any more heavy than something like Facebook. And yeah, Facebook needs a ton of processing power because of the size, but when it was smaller, which games tend to be when they're dying, it's possible to run these systems on like end user hardware. That's definitely possible. Can you really expect all features in... Oh, that's cool. But also this is problematic. I'm going to copy this into my notepad because this is where lawyers, in my opinion, are going to be the biggest problem. Wouldn't what you're asking for, ban online only games? No. Why would it? Yeah. They would just have to have a planned end of life that enabled the product to continue. It's kind of interesting because we've actually seen software. I'm going to copy this. software going a completely different way. So it used to be that, like Photoshop was a software that you purchased and then you owned it. You kept it on your computer. You maybe even had a CD to install it. A CD was like a laser disc. No, I'm kidding. I'm sure you all have Google. So you installed software and you kept it. And then almost every piece of software shifted to a subscription model where you're paying for it over and over again because people were just buying one version and then not upgrading because 90% of the use cases can be done by 10% of the tools. And that 10% of people who needed the advanced tools, they were the only ones upgrading. And then someone decided, hey, a subscription business model would force everyone to upgrade. And that person got patted on the back despite arguably doing more to destroy the software industry than anyone has been doing destruction towards the gaming industry. So, yeah, I worry that the phrasing of this would move more towards more games towards a subscription model, though subscription models don't tend to work in games that well. There's like two popular MMOs that employ a subscription model. So, maybe not. Isn't it unreasonable to ask this of free to play games? Yes, but. Oh, yeah. Microtransactions. Microtransactions are not free to play games, microtransactions are freemium games. There is a subtle difference. So, regulations would have no impact on non-commercial games that are 100% free. This is curious. I wonder if non-commercial games that are 100% free stop being so if they have advertising on their website or, sell any kind of metadata to a third party. It's a interesting line. Isn't the law settled on this already? Probably not, because if it was, what purpose would this have? Not in many other countries. There we go. This is a grey area, and maybe the first part I don't fully agree with. So here we have, wouldn't what you're asking for force the company to give up its intellectual property rights? Technically, no, but it would require the company to give up their intellectual property, not the rights to it. They would still have the rights to that property, but they would be forced to give it up because the server software is the intellectual property of the maker, the manufacturer, the game developer. So I feel like this one's a bit more grey than at least I would like to see here, because I don't think this is fully honest and clear. Like, it is requiring well, maybe not. Like, if, for example, there are two methods. I'll copy this one, then we'll go, when we go into the tech, we'll actually dive in a bit more into that one. License agreements, like music. Yes, music is a pain. Like, I still own the original Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater for the PlayStation 2, and my PlayStation 2 still works, which means I have the copy of the game which has the weird vampire dream sequence that inspired Metal Gear Rising. What was the Revengeance, which is not a word. So that version of the game is no longer available. You can't play that mini game because it used music that like the license ran out. So for a long time you couldn't even get Snake Eater, the third Metal Gear Solid game, and now you can only get it without that mini game. And actually there's a remake coming out, so I wonder if they'll remake the mini game and not use licensed music for it. Wouldn't this be a security risk for video game companies? Not at all. Okay, this is like the previous one was something I kind of disagreed with. This I flat out disagree with. We'll go into that in a bit. Harm developers. I feel like it could potentially harm developers. Like not I don't think it could harm developers in a way that should stop this, but for example, they're not all developers are made equal. This will definitely not harm AAA and large studio developers. It might affect the online functions of indie games, so that's something to consider. It's possible, but hey, they've possible a small number of developers could find new requirements problematic if they were underprepared for them. And yeah, that's fair. It's especially fair in the case of indie developers who might not have the knowledge. You know, if we look at one of the most successful indie games, Stardew Valley, which is still a one person show, we get that idea that one person then needs to be an expert in all areas, and they actually do that surprisingly well in a lot of these indie games. So then the whole online aspect might become challenging. So it may harm developers in that direction, in the indie direction, which is unfortunate because, frankly, a lot of indie developers are putting out stuff that's superior to the large studios at the moment. Won't this bankrupt video game companies? No. Honestly, this is again, it's more likely going to affect small developers, but as they say, small developers are less likely to be contributing to the problem in the first place. Hmm. This is okay. Hmm. So the effect would not be retroactive. So it's not going to like change anything previously. It's just going to prevent it in the future. That's okay. Wording is intentionally vague. This is maybe a problem, and we'll talk about that shortly. No, I don't think that. Okay, so these are all these are for the most part extremely reasonable requirements. These, I mean, they're clear, they are understandable. I do disagree with some of them, and we'll get into that now. So, I do want to bring up the pirate gaming controversy first because it's fun. Why not? So, there's a developer, I guess, a former cybersecurity person who now makes video games, apparently used to work at Blizzard, who was popular. I honestly avoided most of knowing who he was until he popped up on my feed in this controversy, and it's kind of interesting. And he was a dick. Like we can say that. I remember what was his summary of this. I hope you get everything you've asked for and nothing that you want. And like I genuinely can't think of a way he could have been more of a dick while making that statement, unless he was like actively kicking a puppy at the time. So yeah, not gonna defend his behavior. His behavior was ridiculous, but mm, there is like everything, there's nuance. What am I looking for? He actually, in a large response, he said kind of a few things. This is interesting. This isn't a clipping issue with my OBS. This is the website that's decided that the text is starting several pixels off the screen. So, honestly, I'd really just like to find his Twitter response. And yes, to me, it will always be Twitter. I'm afraid I can't bring myself to call it X. So, we can sum up what he said. I'm struggling to find the actual tweets. What do you call tweets now that Twitter isn't Twitter? Like, do you call them X's? What is the verb in this context? I don't know. What I'd really like is I'd like to see. Okay. Let's see if I can find the statements. Honestly, having to go to this website at all is painful to me at this point. Okay. None of these are helpful. Is it organizing them by... Okay, I'm gonna have to try and find that another time. But he made, lots of statements, lots of defensive statements, most of which are, again, kind of him being a dick. But he did say one thing which I think is actually exactly what people need to do. And he said, you shouldn't take his word for things, for anything. You shouldn't take anyone's individual word for any given subject. You should see both sides of it, and you should make your own decision. You shouldn't outsource your critical thinking, and that's actually a valid stance. So that's really what I'd like to do here, because for me this seems like a decent thing. It's a fair thing to aim for, and I don't see a problem with it, except the ones I'm about to talk about. And I think some of them will veer kind of close to what Pirate Gaming was saying, but I'm hoping I'm able to do it to illustrate a potential problem instead of doing what he was doing, which was just being a dick. So, looking at things from maybe a more critical side, but let's try and keep it respectful. Let's talk about actually, tech side can wait. Let's talk about the compliance side. So, GDPR, I don't even remember what it stands for, General Data Protection Regulation or something. It was basically a rule designed to protect the personal data of people on the internet. Actually, not just on the internet, I believe, but mostly on the internet. Anyone who's been on the internet for the past 5 years may have noticed all of the awful pop-ups that happen whenever you go to any website. Let's see. Here we go. Here's the first one. We care about your privacy. We and our 919 partners store and access personal data. This could be read as we sell your data to 919 different parties. We go into show purposes, tracking cookies performance, functional, store device information, personalized ads, precise geolocation, actively scan device characteristics for identification, present advertising content, save and communicate privacy choices, link different devices. This is what happened with GDPR. GDPR was designed to protect people's data, and instead, the companies in charge decided the best way to approach it was just to, in the most obnoxious way they could, force people to agree to have their data gathered. This is exactly what happened here. There was the spirit of the law, and there was the letter of the law. And everyone chose to go with the letter. And the spirit of the law was faded slowly into the background. And this is how corporations see things. They want the letter of the law. And the same thing happens with the right to repair. The right to repair devices became, I don't want to lie to you, let's look it up. So new rules reinforce the right to repair. Obtained an EU right to repair directive, so people have or are gaining the right to repair, and companies are having to support this. The problem is, there was nothing to stop them from setting whatever price they felt like for the repairs. So now, sure, you can repair your iPhone. I think one of the first people to do it requested the repair things from Apple. They were required to use a specific toolkit which Apple provided. They had to give credit card details, and they had a 72-hour return period for those tools. If they didn't return them in that time, Apple reserved the right to charge them a 10,000 euro or dollar fee. This is what companies do when a government attempts to force them to do the right thing. They will do everything they possibly can to duck it. Will raise the bar and they will limbo underneath it. They don't understand. And this is something that needs to be taken into account when it comes to Stop Killing Games, because there are a couple of things we can go into here. So the first one is, let's minimize these. Okay, so the first thing I want to go into is, let's say, the definition of playable. Because this is the first grey area that I think companies are going to look into. And we're going to use the example of a racing game, because I know the crew is one of the things that triggered this. Now, a racing game. How do we define a racing game? You have to compete against a X. We don't specifically know what X is. Now, if the game is... is the game playable if you are competing against a time trial? So you're only ever competing against yourself. We may define a racing game as having multiple track choices. How many of those are required to make a game playable? Is 1 out of 10 tracks playable? So the crew, I've never played the crew, but I'm assuming it's a racing game where you get to race against other people online. Now, are the other people online part of the equation? Because that's another active direction they can take. If other players are required and they're able to demonstrate that there are not enough players to support, then they can easily argue that your legislation is impossible to implement. The other thing we have to consider here, I mean, there are these companies, the companies that banded together against Stop Killing Games, have legal teams which are far larger than anything reasonably managed by the community. They are going to argue every single grey area they can find to, first off, prevent this from passing, and secondly, if it does pass, they are going to give you the least accurate definition of playable that they can possibly manage. And that's, in my opinion, going to look like this. You're going to end up with a racing game with no other racers where you can play one track, and they might even try and argue against giving you that. So, yeah, the legal side of things is challenging. When we talk about the tech side of things, there's a different angle, though. So the tech is... I should copy this instead of moving it. So the tech side, we have the standard architecture of an online game is you have the game, which is the client, and you have the server, which is the server. And server is such a misleading term because a server can either mean be hardware, which runs programs, or the server can be software, which runs the required tooling to support an online interaction. There is another term for this. This can be a daemon, but that's a term that's rarely used. So when we're talking about servers here, we're specifically talking about software. So you have a server and a client. It's a standard architecture. You'll see it everywhere, pretty much. Like, actually, everything's using web interfaces these days, which is fine because then you'll have your browser, which is the client, and the server, which serves the data. So it's exactly the same architecture. It might communicate differently, it might be on a different protocol, but basically what happens is it's the game client sends updates, and the server sends updates back. Now, obviously, you're not playing by yourself, so you have multiple gamers. You have a server, you have a client, and the server can work in one of two ways. It can either be maybe a live server, and that means all the data is being passed to it, and everything flows between the server and you. Or it can be a matchmaking server, which means it initiates... Well, let's make two documents. Ooh, I made a bendy arrow. Interesting. We'll have to keep that in mind for later. Or you have a matchmaking server where the initialization happens from the server, and the server tells the two of you and the server tells the two of you to talk to each other to play the game together. This is two relatively simple architectures to show how server-based systems work. Now, this is where the discussion of it would not make be a larger security risk. And I don't think it's a massive failing on the side of StopKillingGames, but it is an additional security risk for several reasons. Actually, pretty much just one reason, but it'll give you an idea. Let's look into it. So, when we're talking about security of any system, we're talking about attack surface. An attack surface is the area in which a malicious actor can approach systems. So, in cybersecurity, we do this thing called hardening. And this is basically to limit the attack surface. And what this means is, when you buy a new computer, you have Windows installed on it, and it comes with random software you don't want. And it comes with a fairly large amount of it, so let's stack up some random software. Now, each of these pieces of random software is communicating, usually in some way, with an external surface. And these software, they might not be updated, they might have known vulnerabilities. These increase your attack surface. So how we harden things in cybersecurity is we delete them. And then we delete this and add Linux, because we don't want Windows, let's be fair. So for example, if we start with a new Linux server, we might have let's actually look it up. Okay. This is not what I want. I want to know what ports are open by default. Don't make me install Ubuntu just to check it. To be fair, it's probably kind of limited. There may be like the DNS ports open and such. But okay, so the purpose of hardening is to cut down on unnecessary software. So you may, on a Linux web server, you'll be running two things, probably. You'll be running HTTP, which will be running on ports. And you don't need to know what ports are. We can dive into that if someone's interested at some point. I forgot the HTTP ports for some reason. And you may be running a way to connect to it remotely. You might not be if you are provisioning this server with something like Terraform. Then maybe you don't need to make changes. You just spin it down and spin up the new version. But this might be an idealized setup. So you have two open ports. You might start with something like DNS, which I think is 53. Feel free to flame me in the chat if I'm wrong. But the whole point of hardening is to cut out unnecessary ports. And honestly, if you have a static, well, you usually don't need this port open. This is a like minimized. I shouldn't say you usually don't need the DNS port open, but we're not going to get into DNS now. That's its own headache. So this is a hardened system. It's a system with reduced attack surface, and there's obviously things we can do. This is just network layer hardening. We also do operating system level hardening and such. So there's a number of things we do. Now, if we look over here, we have two pieces of software. We have, can't control click. I guess I'll have to get the arrow and delete it. So we have two pieces of software. Currently, the attack surface for this software on a system level is this. Now, there's this process called reverse engineering. In the current method, this game client is the only part susceptible to reverse engineering. In the proposed model, there are two areas of potential reverse engineering. And that's, so this is the thing. To say it doesn't increase the security risk is not accurate, in my opinion. It actually doubles the potential reverse engineering attack surface. So to say it doesn't, and I actually want to look at the phrasing for this because it was kind of interesting. Wouldn't this be a security risk for video game companies? Not at all. In asking for the game to be operable, we are not demanding all internal code and documentation, just a functional copy of the game. It will be no more of a security risk than selling the game in the first place. Now, there are ways that companies could go about it. They could patch the game to make it playable without a server, but that wouldn't work for like fully live service games that need other people. So in that case, we're looking at things like the release of server software. So it's a bit of a tripping point to say not at all. It does increase the potential for reverse engineering. And if we want to look into why that matters, we have to look at one of my favorite games. And this is actually also leading from the legal side of things. We have Dark Souls. Using an unfamiliar keyboard. I did it. Okay, let's look at the Dark Souls game. Or games. Hopefully there's a handy Wikipedia page which gives me all the information I want in one place. – 2011, yes. Dark Souls 2 in 2014. Then we have Dark Souls 3 in 2016. And then we have Elden Ring 2022. Now, before you say Elden Ring is not a Dark Souls game, I know, but I have a point, and we're going to get to it. Now, let's do a little lampshading, because someone's going to say, oh, this is a bad example. These games work as single player. They do. They are single player games. Online is optional, and they are not retired. So these are not ideal examples, but they are examples that help illustrate rather than be actually indicative, because as I said at the start, I don't play that many online games. Now, when Dark Souls 1 was released, I think it released with multiplayer. The multiplayer functionality is exactly the same across all of these games. It actually uses the same engine. We know this because of the Dark Souls remote code execution attack that existed in all of the Dark Souls games. So Dark Souls 1 Prepare to Die Edition, Dark Souls Remastered, Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls 3. All of these all of these systems used the same online matchmaking system. It was vulnerable to the same attacks, which forced or allowed for the execution of code on a remote computer. Now, this is bad, obviously. This is an attack, but you can see this is here to illustrate that even if a game is old, if it's released in 2011, the multiplayer of that game may not change all that much. The server behind everything can essentially be the same. Like, I don't know that the Dark Souls was exactly the same, but it was similar enough that the vulnerability existed across the entire set of these games. I think it was patched before the release of Elden Ring, but the Dark Souls servers were offline for quite a long time. Yep, 2 months. I don't know how long they took to fix. I seem to remember Dark Souls 3 was back up first, but it suggests that the architecture of this is always similar. Now, this has two angles that we need to discuss. One is the legal angle, and the other is the technical angle. The legal angle is, of course, that it becomes possible to argue that while a game can be retired, the server software is not. And there is every possibility that this would lead to the idea that this could be only made available when the last game that uses it is retired. And all this means is that they need to not retire one game and they can keep this. It's an entirely valid interpretation of the Stop Killing Games idea. And this is like when Pirate Software was saying he hopes you get everything you've asked for and nothing that you want. This is, in my opinion, one of the considerations. And again, he was an utter dick about it. I'm going to say that every time I bring it up so that no one is under any illusions that I feel otherwise. But there are some valid criticism in there, wrapped in all the ego and arrogance, and it's something that needs to be considered. The technical angle is we already know that this software was vulnerable. And this was discovered by people testing through networks. Imagine how much more vulnerable that could become when applied to reverse engineering. And there's a obvious solution to this, which would be to have it's that simple. If the developers actually tested the security of their software, which they do surprisingly little in video games, then I mean, we mitigate that problem. And that's what the Stop Killing Games initiative is talking about when it's talking about with consideration and timing and understanding, then the ability to provide this data is not going to be difficult for companies, but they are going to fight it. Unfortunately, they're going to fight it every step of the way. So I guess the outcome here is that there's no good outcome. So I'm going to put a little summary, because I think the summary of this will help. And the first part of that is legal will duck under everything possible. And they will do that through weird definitions of playable and where have we got it? Restricted choices. They will make it so that the thing that you requested for these games to be playable, they will make it so that you don't get what you want, but you get what you asked for. It does require the release of IP, but not IPR, and there are subtleties there, which we've discussed. It increases the risk of reverse engineering, so it's not entirely genuine, what I would say on the website. And this increases the security risk, as we've discussed. I do think it's a step in the right direction. It's not perfect at this point, but I think the point was it shouldn't be. Just I hope people don't get their hopes up. And a final thing, that even assholes can have some wisdom. Don't outsource your critical thinking. Like, watch the statements by Pirate Software. Watch the response video by what's his name? Ross Scott. Ross Scott? That sounds like it. Watch the response videos. Understand the nuance of things that are going on. Don't just allow angry people to lead you down angry paths, because, well, it's kind of fruitless. So even take this video with a grain of salt. You may not agree with everything I say, but I think it's important to consider it and then make up your own mind. But I will end by highlighting this one because it's good. The subscription software idea sucks. The idea that we no longer own things we buy is terrible, and this is a step in the right direction. So I guess I can say the opposite of pirate software in that I hope you get what you want, even though I'm too familiar with how these legal aspects go to think it likely. I think I will leave it there. I hope I've only offended people enough that it's kind of funny. Have yourselves a good day.